Malcolm Turnbull, spectacularly let down our country, hasn't he, and his former party with his latest nasty spray at the Prime Minister in Glasgow. But the person who's done himself the most damage in siding with the French leader against his own is actually Labor's would-be PM, the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese. And we all know that Turnbull has become the miserable ghost he warned against, terminally bitter and twisted and running an endless vendetta against those he blames for his demise, whether it's Rupert Murdoch, Peter Dutton, Matthias Cormann, Christian Porter or Scott Morrison. Here he was overnight in Glasgow.
If Morrison had wanted to act honestly, let's just imagine that for a minute, hold that thought. If he'd wanted to act honestly, he would have sat down with the French and said, OK, we want to move to naval nuclear propulsion.
According to Scott Morrison, that information could not be shared with Emmanuel Macron, even though he leads a NATO power. Do you accept any of that?
No, I don't accept any of that at all. France placed enormous trust in Australia. I mean, the submarine deal was not just a shipbuilding contract. It was a sovereign partnership between France and Australia. Oh, he's lied to me on many occasions. I mean, there's quite a few examples in my book, but Scott has always had a reputation for telling lies.
Now, I'm sure what really irks Turnbull about the AUKUS submarine partnership is that it's so much better than the deal he did, which was to take an existing French nuclear sub and spend the next 15 years plus redesigning it and building it in Adelaide to end up with a vastly inferior and costly conventional boat. Effectively, Turnbull turned our most important defence acquisition into a jobs boondoggle for Adelaide to reward his allies in the coup against his predecessor. Turnbull's spleen against Morrison extending way beyond the subs deal to claim that the Prime Minister, quote, always had a reputation for telling lies. Well, that's plainly just sour grapes over Morrison's doing to him what he had earlier done to Tony Abbott. And in any event, other than as a tool for the cultural left, I suppose, to use it against a sitting Liberal Prime Minister, Turnbull's bad behaviour in Glasgow today only damages himself, given how irrelevant in terms of real power he is nowadays. But not so Albanese. It's his behaviour which is the real concern, because this bloke is the alternative Prime Minister of the country. And if the polls are right, might well move into the lodge come May. Former PMs can perhaps be forgiven, a little bit of ill discipline and self-indulgence from time to time, but not so prospective PMs, who should be earning the public's trust by showing, when it counts, the mettle and judgment needed to be worthy national leaders. That's not by taking the French side against Australia's in a dispute over the submarines deal that the Labor leader says he supports.
One of the things about Scott Morrison is that those people who know him best, who've worked with him the closest, can attest to the flaws in his character, particularly when it comes to truthfulness. And we see that when, after President Macron made the comments that he did about our Prime Minister, he did two things. Firstly, he tried to say that journalists were just taking selfies, something that wasn't true in itself. And then he tried to say that it was a sledge on Australia.
Scoring cheap political points against your political opponent should never mean stooping to take another country's side against our own. And it should never mean trying to add to the Prime Minister's burdens when he's doing his best for our country abroad. There was once an understanding, I mentioned this loosely the other night, Bob Hawke called it the London Convention, that PMs wouldn't play domestic political politics when they were overseas, and that opposition leaders would respect that truce. If Hawke is the Labor leader that Albanese wants to emulate, he better start lifting his game. As things stand, I think most Australians are more than happy to back Scott Morrison against Emmanuel Macron. They know that 46,000 Australians died defending France in World War I, that the French record in our region has its issues, and that given the changing security environment we're living through, France has no business asking us to sacrifice our national interest to appease French pride. In fact, this submarine spat with France, kicked along again today by their ambassador in a fiery speech to the National Press Club in Canberra, shows just what an unreliable partner the French always were, and how much better off we are getting a much better sub from much more trustworthy allies. Albanese's flakiness over the nuclear subs deal shows how urgent it is to get the whole AUKUS arrangement well and truly underway before the election, not in 18 months' time, and get this locked in. If the G20 and Glasgow have shown us anything other than the immaturity of a former PM and an alternative PM, it's that China will ruthlessly pursue its own national interest. That's why the sooner Australia can get our flag on a nuclear submarine, now that we've made the decision in principle to do so, well, the stronger and safer our country will be.